Great towers of gold, cities shining white as silver. I thought I was going mad. Then I found this place, Jacques de Molay's vault. Through his writings, I understood. I was connected to Grandmaster de Molay. Hello, and welcome to Visions of the Past. This is an Assassin's Creed lore podcast. My name is Andrew, and I'm grateful to see that you have found this podcast. Today, we're going to talk about what connects the man who gave us our introductory quote, Francois Thomas Germain, and who he was talking about, Jacques de Molay. Besides, of course, both being Templar Grand Masters, they were in fact both sages. Sages were first introduced within Assassin's Creed IV, Black Flag, with the characters of Bartholomew Roberts and John Standish. Sages were also shown in Assassin's Creed Unity and Syndicate, as well as the comic Assassin's Creed Uprising, and mentioned in the novel Assassin's Creed Heresy, along with the companion book Abstergo's Employee Handbook. Sages are pretty interesting when you look at what they truly are. According to Abstergo, the average human genome contains 2 10,000ths to 5 10,000ths of 1% of Isu DNA. Sages, though, contain between 5 and 6% of Isu DNA within their genome. In contrast, the most gifted human because of his level of Isu DNA within the genome was Desmond Miles, who had roughly 1% of Isu DNA within his genome. Besides the level of Isu DNA, sages have a specific look to them. Usually, they would possess a distinctive combination of anisocoria and heterochromia. Anisocoria is a condition characterized by having the pupils of the eyes being different sizes, and heterochromia is where the eyes are 2 different colors, which in a sage's case, the right eye was usually brown, while the left eye was usually blue. Sages would also bear a strong physical resemblance to the Isu Aida, though they would not always express the same parts of his DNA, which would result in sages not technically being considered clones of Aida. They would also have their own memories, along with their own genetic and ethnic backgrounds, along with usually possessing a very high-level intellect. The high concentration of Aida's DNA would eventually lead to the memories of Aida manifesting themselves at some point in a sage's adult life, usually described as a traumatic experience where the sage would believe that they were going mad, as their memories and personality would merge into what was once Aida's. Some sages would become erratic, some would learn to control and repress it, while others would just embrace the change. The history of sages really starts with the Isu Aita. In an attempt to save the Earth from a solar flare, sometime around 75,000 BC, Aida would volunteer to be a test subject for a solution to save the Isu civilization. His wife Juno would attempt to transfer Aida's consciousness into a more resilient synthetic body, but Aida would die in the attempt. After this failed attempt, Juno would manipulate the human genetic code by implanting a hidden trigger that would randomly activate and alter the genetic makeup of an individual, which would trigger Aida's memories and personality, allowing Aida to be reborn in human form. After his death, sages would be recorded throughout known human history, all over the globe. According to Baha'u'llah, the assassin mentor of the Caribbean Brotherhood in the mid to late 17th century, there had been at least 8 recorded sages by that time, though this number is thought to be much higher by the Abstergo entertainment researchers early in the 21st century. The Mayans and the Taino people of the Caribbean would worship the sages, going so far as to build a statue resembling the head of one sage within the ruins of Tulum in Mexico. The Caribbean would be an important area for sages, as in his life, Aida built the observatory to house a crystal skull along with blood vials of Isu blood. Around 1500, an unknown sage would hire local tribes to protect the site, though when he died, the locals, who now then called themselves guardians, hid his tomb as to not allow anyone to use his blood to enter the observatory. In 1673, a new sage by the name of Thomas Cavanna Jr. would move to Jamaica but would be abducted by Bahlam's Brotherhood of Assassins in an attempt to protect him from the Templars of the region. After learning more about what a sage was, Kavana would follow his visions to the observatory, where the Guardians would accept him and explain that his predecessor had done to protect the observatory. Kavana would die in 1706, and like his predecessor, he would be buried by the Guardians. In 1715, a sage from Wales, Bartholomew Roberts, would be captured in Cuba by the local Templars and interrogated on the location of the observatory. Roberts would escape, eventually becoming a pirate, and after Edward Kenway killed the Templars John Cockram and Josiah Burgess, who were sent to find Roberts while he was in Principe, Roberts would promise Kenway that he would take him to the observatory. After capturing the Royal Fortune from Templars, they would together arrive at the observatory, where Roberts would show Kenway the power of the complex. After betraying Kenway and sending him to Jamaica as a prisoner, Roberts would take the crystal skull, along with blood vials that were found on the Royal Fortune, and use them to know the location of important fleets, which would lead to Roberts becoming the richest and most famous pirate in history. In February 1722, Edward Kenway would catch up with Roberts in Principe, while the Royal Fortune was battling both the British and the Spanish navies. During the battle, Kenway would assassinate Roberts by hanging him from his man-of-war with a rope dart. After recovering the crystal skull, Kenway would weigh down and throw Roberts' body to the bottom of the sea. While the Caribbean was an important location for sages because of Aida's work with the observatory, it is not the only place where we found sages. For example, at the end of the 13th century, the sage Jacques de Molay would become the Grand Master of the Templar Order and would lead them till their fall on October 13th, 1307. But before being captured, he would write the Codex Pata Intellectus, a tome where he wrote all his knowledge about the Isu and his thoughts on reforming the Templar Order. These thoughts he would also share with the 9 members of the Templar Order who would go on to reorganize it. He'd be able to hide his codex and the Sword of Eden in a vault underneath the Temple of Paris, and while in Chinon prison, he would hide the heart, an Isu artifact that increased the power of the Sword of Eden, within the walls of his prison cell. On March 18, 1314, he would be burned in the stake at the Ile de la Cité while cursing Pope Clement V and the French royal family. Over 4 centuries later, the sage Francois Thomas Germain became a member of the Parisian Rite of the Templar Order. But instead of having the memories of Aida, he would start to see the memories of Jacques de Molay himself. This would lead him to the Codex Pata Intellectus and a Sword of Eden. But after asking for the reformation of the Templar Order that de Molay wrote about, Germain would be expelled and branded a heretic by the Parisian Grand Master Francois de la Serre. Germain would eventually plan and lead a coup d'etat by killing de la Serre, and after becoming Grand Master, would assassinate or bribe de la Serre's followers and would attempt to kill his daughter Elise. Germain would use the French Revolution to arrest King Louis XVI, which would lead to the king's execution in 1793, and in Germain's thoughts, avenging de Molay's death. After the death of the king, Germain would install the Reign of Terror in an attempt to bring forward a new world order. This would eventually lead to the death of Germain on July 28, 1794, by the assassin Arnaud Dorian and Elise de la Serre. 12 years after Germain's death, Arnaud would hide his remains within the catacombs of Paris. Throughout history, a number of sages would stay true to Aida's memory and for his love of Juno. Bartholomew Roberts, for example, had every intention to find the Grand Temple and liberate Juno from it, but he was killed before he could do so. It was with this in mind that the sages would form cults throughout history with Isu as their deities and leading in prayers for their return. The latest of which is the Instruments of the First Will, which was first known to be active during World War I. During this time, a sage only known as the Master Spy would lead the instruments as a spy ring within the city of London for the German Empire. After Juno was freed from the Grand Temple in 2012, another sage by the name of John Standish would begin to search for a suitable host for her. He would do this by working at Abstergo Entertainment in Montreal, while also being an associate of the assassins Sean Hastings and Rebecca Crane, who were working undercover at the facility at the time. Standish would eventually choose an analyst at Abstergo Entertainment as a host for Juno, but after Juno was not able to take over the analyst's body, Standish would be shot to death by Abstergo security as he attempted to poison the analyst. Abstergo would take the body and study it with the intent to search for other sages throughout history. They would also initiate the Phoenix Project with the goal to completely map the genome of the Isu and unlock the secrets of the Pieces of Eden through the sages' genetic memories. This would lead to the assassins recruiting several users of Abstergo's Helix system to search genetic memories for more sages in an attempt to keep their bodies out of Abstergo's hands. In October of 2015, the 10-year-old Elijah would be brought to an Abstergo clinic, where it would be discovered he was not only Desmond Miles' illegitimate son, but he was also a sage. Elijah would go on to work with the Instruments of the First Will in their attempts to bring Juno into a physical body using the Abstergo Phoenix Project. Because of Elijah's parental lineage and his status as a sage, he had a higher concentration of Isu DNA than most other sages. This would enable him to resist Aida's personality from taking over while being able to take advantage of Aida's memories and knowledge. Using this knowledge, he would be able to sabotage Juno and the Instruments of the First Will's efforts of resurrecting her, and would eventually assist in Juno's final death in August of 2018. At this point, you might be asking yourself, exactly how many sages have there been through the course of Assassin's Creed history? Well, the simple answer is we don't know for sure. As we see the history of the world filled in with each new installment, there is always a chance that a new sage will be introduced. But as of right now, there are 10 confirmed sages and 6 individuals that are speculated by Abstergo to be sages. Known sages include an unnamed Sumerian man that was alive sometime around the 3rd millennium BC, a Mayan sage whose head was the basis of the statue of Tulum around the 13th century, Jacques de Molay, the last public Grand Master of the Templar Order, who was born around 1244 and died in 1314, a Caribbean sage in the 16th century who established the Guardians of the Observatory, Thomas Cannavaro Jr., who lived between 1652 and 1706, the pirate Bartholomew Roberts, who lived between 1682 and 1722, Parisian Templar Grand Master Francois Thomas Germain, who lived between 1726 and 1794, the master spy that was active in World War I, who died in 1916, John Standish, the Instruments of the First Will member, who infiltrated Abstergo Entertainment, who lived between 1975 and 2013, and Elijah, who was born around 2005. Speculated sages includes a Jewish man in the 1st century known as the Wanderer, an ancestor of Desmond Miles who lived in the Hunnic Empire during the 5th century, a man who lived in Constantinople under Emperor Justinian I during the 6th century, a Chinese man who served in the court of the Hongwu Emperor in the 14th century, an Indian man that was present during the creation of the Indian National Congress in 1885, and an English singer born by the name of David Jones that lived between 1975 and 2013. When sages were first introduced in the series, I was rather surprised. John Standish's face was hidden throughout the story, and I had no idea that he was connected to Bartholomew Roberts. I also found myself missing the sage connections through the games until I was able to pause the cutscenes and take a good look at someone's eyes. Seeing them as being haunted by the memories of Aida and how his memories and his personality could change a person brought a nice twist to what high concentration of Isu DNA can do to a person. Most of the characters that turned out to be sages fit into the stories that were being told well enough. But the thought that Desmond's son Elijah, who I refuse to call Miles, as it's unlikely that a child who was raised by his mother with little knowledge of his father would take his father's name. Him also being a sage kind of felt shoehorned because they used both him being the son of Desmond and a sage and combined them in a way that you had a sage and Desmond's son and Juno. And it just felt like it was shoehorned. He could have done that just by being Desmond's son, or he could have done it by just being a sage. They basically came up with this story that because he was a sage, he had access to all this memories of Aida, but it took that 1 extra percent of Isu DNA from Desmond that he was able to repress the personality of Aida long enough to use his memories. That being said, even though it felt shoehorned, I do kind of want to see more of the character, because at this point he's 15, he's a sage with so many memories in his head, but he also has the Isu artifact, the Kui Noir, and to see what he could do with something like that interests me. And I will admit, I do think it's unlikely that we'll get more sages in the lore, especially after the soft reboot that was Origins. But within history, there were a number of famous people with heterochromia, most notably Alexander the Great and the Byzantine Emperor Anastasius I. And because of these two people, you could tell some interesting stories of sages in power. And then you add on top of that Origins introducing Alexander the Great having his own Staff of Eden. It could lead to some extremely interesting stories that I would be excited to read or play or even watch. But with that said, I want to thank you for your time, and please feel free to subscribe to the podcast, and you can find me on Twitter at visions_AC. Until next time, my assassin friends, make sure to follow the creed, and to those Templars listening, may the Father of Understanding guide you.